really interesting how I think that in a lot of ways, fashion has and hasn't changed in that there's always trends. But I think the cyclical or the timeline nature of said trends are perhaps shorter now because of the proliferation of social media and how quickly we burn through certain trends. But I think when it comes to Taylor specifically and her style and her fashion, what rings true always for me is that I've always described every era that she dresses for because like from 2011 to now we've seen quite a number of very distinct eras, as we've seen as many distinct albums really since 2011. So she's always had, she's methodically dressed to the era, but I've always said that her fashion for an era is like window dressing, because there's always an innate sense of Taylor-ishness to her fashion. There's always something that's recognizable at the core. It's like a uniform being worn where there's always something recognizably her to everything that she wears, just as there's always something recognizably her in everything that she writes. So the themes of her album may change, love or revenge or friendship or dealing with, the realities of, what it might look like when you lose a parent, and, the realities of like your changing relationship with family and friends. And as you get older, as your prism of life, starts to change and shift. But there's always something at, the emotional core of a song that is Taylor. Same goes for her fashion, where, she may be dressing in pastels and butterflies, or she may be wearing camouflage and snake print and a lot of black, or she may be wearing, really tall heels and crop tops. But there's always a sense of like coming back home and a sense of core where like the silhouette may never change, but the colors may change or the accessories may change. But at its core, there's something very Taylor, regardless of the era. It's just an evolution of self. And I think that rings true across both forms of art that she brings to the world, the sonic and the visual.
Yeah, can you feel like when she's gonna drop an album, like as a writer, kind of just like can you see the fashion changing and you're like, all right, something's coming, or I just feel it over time, just as long as you've been writing about Taylor and her style.
Yeah, not to plug it, but I wrote a newsletter called The Moments I Knew, which is a reference to a Taylor song called The Moment I Knew. And it's a newsletter where I dive into like the certain specific candid, or street style moments throughout Taylor's career where when she showed up or walked out, I immediately knew that something was different, that something had shifted. I think there's I think I more feel strength in putting the puzzle pieces together. Like I've said, I feel like her music and her fashion are these two halves of a locket, and you really require both halves in order to understand what it is she's saying because one informs the other so strongly. Um, so it feels easier to look back and be able to be like, oh, I think that is what like the bustiers and the corsets were trying to say now as it relates to the vulnerability and intimacy that we see on the Tortured Poets department. That makes sense to me. It's more difficult to prognosticate and be like, this is what I think plaid means when we don't have the other half of the story, like of what TS12, like her next album might be. So it's difficult to say what something means, but there have definitely been a handful of moments in Taylor's career where she has stepped out in something so distinctly different that it's very obvious that something is happening. Like the very first time that Taylor ever wore a crop top, I remember that moment. It was June 2014. It was a pink marled crop top, and like skirt set. And she was like wearing these like super high heels. And I looked at that and I knew that the next album was coming and that it was going to be different. And that album was 1989 and it came out October of that year and it was different.
If you enjoyed that clip, make sure you head over to www.bookupapp.com to download our app so you can connect with your favorite bookish content creators, start conversations, and start your own book club.